Hey, this is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore, and we're here with another of our virtual events. And tonight, it's a true crime night, and I'm the big true crime fan here on the staff of the store. And it's a real pleasure to welcome Caitlin Rother, who's going to be talking about her new book, Death on Ocean Boulevard. And Caitlin is going to, I believe, send us some signed book plates so we can tuck into copies. And I'll go ahead and put a link to the book in the comments field if you're watching on Facebook. And also, everybody's watching on Facebook, obviously. But if you have questions for Caitlin or our other surprise, awesome guest, Camille Kimball, my good friend, put them in the comments field and I will be monitoring that, and we'll pop up halfway through the show with questions. But let me give you guys the formal introduction you deserve. Caitlin Rother has written or co-authored 14 books, several Kindle ebooks, and a COVID anthology. As a Pulitzer-nominated investigative journalist, Rother worked nearly 20 years for daily newspapers, drawing from decades of watchdog reporting on topics ranging from addiction to suicide, mental illness, murder, government, and political corruption. She's written books full-time since 2006. A popular speaker, she appears regularly on TV and radio as a true crime expert. As a private narrative nonfiction instructor and coach, she helps aspiring and published authors to shape, write, research, and promote their books during these challenging times of COVID-19 and beyond. We're looking beyond now, hopefully.
Yes.
She also works as a research consultant. And then she loves to go ocean swimming and sings and plays keyboards in the acoustic group Breaking the Code. You're a Renaissance woman, Caitlin.
I try, yes.
And Camille Kimball, we were just catching up, is an Emmy-winning reporter who's written on television, radio, and in newsprint. Her first book, A Sudden Shot, The Phoenix Serial Shooter, was published in 2009. And we did this massive, it was a wonderful event here at the bookstore with some of the victims of these horrible crimes. A terrific book. And their second book, What She Always Wanted, A True Story of Marriage, Greed, and Murder, received the Reader's Choice Best True Crime Award Best True Crime of 2010 award. She can be seen on many TV shows on E!, Oxygen, Investigation, Discovery, and much more. And there are a couple of anthologies and other books that I left out, so forgive me, Camille. But before we get started, I must say I had the real pleasure when Camille was working on the Marjorie Orban book, to kind of ride along with her into the prison, the jail there. And I was her photographer. And so when she was interviewing Marjorie, I got to take pictures. And one of those pictures ended up on the cover of the book. So that's my big claim to fame. So
well, it's an excellent photo, Patrick. And you did a great job, and I put you in a tiny little room with a murderer, and you were really up for the challenge.
It was exciting, but I'm largely going to be kind of sitting in the background here, enjoying this conversation. But I may pop up with some questions for both of you. So, Camille, I'll turn it over to you for the moment.
All right, thank you, Patrick, and thank you to the Poison Pen, and mostly thank you to Caitlin Rother for being here tonight and making Arizona such a priority in her book tour. The book only was released in the last 24 hours. So it's a real privilege for us to be so high up on her list of cities.
Yes.
Thank you. All right. So Caitlin, you write books where you, the cops, the families, and the readers are all trying to get in someone's mind. But let's get into your mind for a little bit. You got your undergraduate degree. I should say you earned your undergraduate degree at UC Berkeley, top school, in psychology. And then you made this interesting left turn to get a master's degree at another top school, Northwestern, in journalism. So first of all, let me say I can think of few better backgrounds for doing true crime, but it's not very common. So tell us, Caitlin, how you ended up taking that zigzaggy path.
Well, actually, when you hear the story, you'll see that I'm actually wasn't quite so zigzaggy. It's kind of a circle. So when I was growing up, I was always interested in, fringe things. I guess, I don't know, I read a lot of books when I was growing up. I was an only child, and I had my head in stories a lot. But as I got older, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a teacher. Every year in elementary school, I wanted to be the grade teacher that I had just finished. So I get to college and I finally said, you know what, I think I want to be a psychology major because I want to be a therapist. I want to understand people and myself better. So I took abnormal psychology and, basically it was an afternoon class, which was difficult. But it kept me awake because the people were so creepy that they were playing these tapes. And I don't know if they were murderers, but they were like really, really sick people, like schizophrenics. And I remember thinking, I can't do this every day. It's going to, I have enough of my own problems. I can't have all this in my head. And then here we are all these many years later. And guess what I'm doing every day is abnormal psychology in these murderers' heads. So, most of my books have convicted criminal cases. This one does not. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, that's a really important thing to outline here, is that there is no convicted criminal in this book, and we don't want to be guilty of saying that there is. Which brings us to my next question, Caitlin. True crime, in my humble opinion, is one of the trickiest kinds of books to write, because in fact, there are so many landmines for a true crime book. So let's talk about the politics of true crime. First of all, you are dealing with people who are in grief, sometimes also shock. Let's hear your experiences and thoughts about that and how to handle it.
So that's where my psychology degree comes into play. So I learned about psychology of the brain. I learned about those little rats that would keep hitting the dopamine and whatever else until they died. They'd keep eating the cocaine and wouldn't eat. And, so I learned about human behavior, and I learned about trauma, and I learned about abnormal behavior. And as a reporter for newspapers, I kind of developed a beat over time, even though I was mostly a politics and government reporter. I had editors who weren't even my editors who would walk over to me with a little news brief that ran in the paper, and they'd say, I think this is one of your stories. So I got to be the bizarre death reporter. And they were actually both suicides. And one of them got me nominated for a Pulitzer. So I have been interested in suicide professionally and from an educational standpoint for quite some time. And the story, for example, that I did for the newspaper that I got nominated for was a 19-year-old young man who was just graduated high school, and right afterwards ended up pouring lighter fluid on himself, lit himself on fire, and 12 hours later, it was the most painful death that he never anticipated. And his family was completely shocked. So that story actually helped inform me writing this book, because the Zahaus from the very beginning said absolutely positively Rebecca did not kill herself. So what I'm saying is I learned over the years from just working as a reporter how to talk to people, how to, especially people who've just been through something like that. I walked into those people's house and they had a shrine to their son all over the room. It was hanging on the walls. She walked up to me with pieces of his burned clothing, and I started crying. And they tell you, oh, you're not supposed to cry. You're supposed to be an objective journalist. The editors would tell me that, you're not supposed to get emotionally involved. Guess what? I did, and it made me seem more human to people, so they would open up to me. So when people are grieving, I just try to be a human being to them, and they really appreciate that. And then they talk to me. And so that's how I do it. And I do it in a sensitive way. You have to watch your tone of voice. I do a lot of it on the phone. And I just try to be really gentle, don't talk too fast. And, you just have to make noises and, make them feel safe talking to you, because they're giving you their trust. And that's really important in a book like about a true crime book in particular.
Would you say that the grieving people in general, by the numbers, want to talk about their loved one, want to get that person's story out, or do they immediately treat you with suspicion and hostility?
It really varies. Because when you think about it, you have the victims, whoever was whoever died, whether they were murdered, or in this case, there's a question of whether it was murder or suicide. But, I still consider both to be victims in a way. So you have to treat family members with great sensitivity. And some of them really don't want to talk. It's too painful. Some of them say, absolutely. I had this woman, I wrote another story that I worked on for a year. I followed all of the recipients of one organ donor, and no one had ever done that before. So there were 5 people and something like 6 organs. And I flew to New York to a woman who said she never wanted to talk to me. All I had to do is send her a letter saying, I'm going to go visit your son's grave. Would you like to come with me? And the next thing you know, she's inviting me into her house, and she wouldn't let me leave. She kept talking. So sometimes people don't realize that they want to talk until they get talking, and they realize that you're a person that's willing to listen, and they don't have anybody else who understands. By the same token, when I've interviewed, for example, a convicted killer's mother, nobody understands what she's going through either. And then they open up to me too, because they've lost their son or daughter to prison for the rest of their lives. So it's like they've lost a child as well.
Yeah.
So that's trauma for them as well. They get threatened. They get their lives threatened. They have people vandalize their homes. They get fired from their job. So I have to come to each person in these stories with great sensitivity, because everybody's going through something like that. And it's hard to, and so I don't cold call generally. I try to go through a lawyer who someone else they trust, so that I get an introduction.
A lot of times they are at a hearing or something, and you meet them in person anyway.
I like to try to meet people. I hand them my card and I say, we don't need to talk now. I just want to let you know I'm working on a book. I know you're going through a lot. So when you're ready, I'd like to talk to you. And, the newspaper reporters, the TV reporters are in their faces, and I don't want them to think that I'm going to, I step back and I just say, I'll wait my turn. I don't need to talk to them right now, when I could, and it'd be great to get that immediacy, but I'll come back around, and they'll appreciate me for doing that.
Because in fact, it is a different job writing the book than
right.
a daily newspaper reporter or TV reporter, radio.
Right.
And it is a very difficult part of this work, but also a part that I feel, and I bet you do too, a great honor that people trust you to talk to them. And
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, for example, I met Rebecca Zahau's mother at the courthouse. That poor woman was grieving and crying. She could not stop crying. They, in fact, had to escort her out of the courtroom. She was so upset the whole time. She couldn't listen to what happened to her daughter, because she was convinced that her daughter had been murdered. And she just couldn't even hear any of it. So she was in the bathroom and she wanted to hug me and, oh, thank you for coming. And I mean, so I just felt so bad for her. Yeah. That's on the book too. So, and I met Rebecca's sister, the one who sued Adam Shacknight as well. And she was much more reserved. So.
Well, moving from the emotional aspect of the landmines in writing true crime, let's talk about some legal ones. You can have different kinds of deadlines for writing one of these books, depending on when your publisher gets interested in the case. Maybe there hasn't even been an arrest in the case of your book. Maybe the trial's in the middle of it. I live in fear of subpoenas. I bet you do too.
I actually have, knock on wood, never gotten a subpoena. Please don't anyone send me one. But this case is the perfect example of landmines, because, and legal especially, because you have, the Shacknights. Jonah Shacknight is a very wealthy man. I keep hearing how he's described as a billionaire on TV. He's not actually a billionaire. He and I kind of laughed about that. He's a millionaire, not a billionaire. But he does have a lot of money, and he has money to spend on litigation. So I need to be very careful about what I say about him or his family. So that was a great concern, and I wanted to be very careful about that. And because, at the beginning, nobody was even a suspect. No one had been arrested. In fact, the sheriff's department declared Rebecca's death a suicide. So it wasn't even considered a crime. So talk about landmines. You can't approach people or accuse people and say, did you murder so-and-so? So finally, when the case gets to civil court, I figure, maybe now it's going to be safe. But then I had to wait some more years to see if it even went anywhere, because people would say, are you going to write a story or a book on the Coronado Mansion murder? And I'd say, well, considering the sheriff's department doesn't even think it's a crime, not right now, I can't. So those are, and the other landmine, which is not necessarily a legal landmine, but in this case, there could have been a killer around, and I was scared for that reason too, right? I mean, I'm either going to get sued or I'm going to get murdered. I'm not sure which one is worse. Well, murdered probably, but you know what I mean? So those are big landmines, especially for this case, more than any other.
And just an aside here, there's a big difference between doing what Caitlin does and what she used to do at a newspaper. When you work at a newspaper, you are surrounded by generally a corporation of some size.
Exactly.
Has lawyers, has security, has other people in the building. You have a sense of safety, both legally and physically. When you're doing what Caitlin does, it's just you and
Yes.
whatever your pocket can afford for a lawyer or for security.
And by the same token, if somebody does sue me, I don't know what they think they're going to get. So just in case anybody's thinking about it, I don't have a whole bunch of assets.
Through Caitlin.
Yeah.
Okay, so another landmine is dealing with law enforcement. So law enforcement has a bit of politics of their own, don't they?
Yes, and I've had to deal with that a number of times now. Again, what you just said, as a newspaper reporter, you have a salary, you're safe, right? I am an author and I have to live in this town. And if I want to do another book about the same agency that investigated a case that I want to write a book on, that's tricky because I'm an investigative reporter and I find out bad things about people. And I write critical things and I write things that people don't want to read. And I don't make anything up. It all has to be factual. I have to do my research. But my point is, I do bring things up and I do juxtapose allegations with context, and the sheriff in this case has had some criticism. He's been under fire, especially in this particular term of his. He had a high number of suicides in the jail. There was a report that came out. A lot of COVID problems, and he was criticized a lot for this case because a lot of people thought that, there was something that didn't smell right. A lot of people thought that this was a murder, and when they came out with this suicide ruling, a lot of people were upset. And then during the re-election campaign, after the civil trial, there was a jury found Adam Shacknight responsible for Rebecca's death. And within a matter of, an hour or two, Sheriff Gore came out with a statement saying he was standing by the suicide findings until his opponent said, well, if I'm elected, I'm going to open this criminal case up again. So then he had to, backtrack and say he was going to his department would do a review of the investigation. That took 9 months. Anyway, my point is, it's all in the book, it's all explained. And there's a lot of politics involved. And I have to I want to chronicle all that because it's very important for the readers. But I don't work for the newspaper anymore. And if I want to write another book about the sheriff's department, I don't know how they're going to take this book, but I can't really make that a driving concern or else I won't write a good book. So I just have to be fair. And the sheriff did sit down with me for a couple hours. He initially declined, but he finally, because he knew me from a previous book, which was very positive about the sheriff's department. So I kind of try to mix them up,
Well,
take a bone away, kind of like that.
let's take everybody a little bit into the sausage factory. And another one of the headaches of writing true crime, the photographs.
Oh, yeah.
Copyrights, et cetera, et cetera.
So that is one of the parts of these books that I almost dread because it's so hard to track down who literally took the photo. And that's what you need is the person whose finger was on the clicker. That's who owns the copyright. And a lot of people don't know that. They think, well, I have this photo in a photo album, therefore I can release it and that's fine. Well, that's not true. That's not the law. So my publisher and lawyers that work for them are very, very conservative. In fact, they even sometimes make me get a release for people who are in the photo now, which didn't used to be the case. So it just takes a tremendous amount of time. There's another area of the law too that I have to be a couple more. Privacy. You have to be careful who you say things about their medical history, their mental health history, anything that they might find, a privacy issue. And then there's the fair use law, which limits how much you can actually quote from a letter or a document or a book or a poem, or, you can only use a very small amount. So I always have to worry about all those things when I'm putting a book together. And, I've done it enough now that I know where the red flags are and what to watch for, but the photos is the most time consuming thing to try to find, because a lot of people don't remember. I don't remember who took that photo. I have it. Isn't that enough? Or it was taken with my camera. I don't know who took it, but it's a picture of me, but it's my camera. And that doesn't matter. It's who took the picture, unfortunately.
Yeah. And the lawyers are very strict about that. Okay, now that we have given everybody a taste of how difficult it is to write these books, let's talk about Death on Ocean Boulevard. It truly is, talk about landmines, one of the most landminiest books I can possibly think of. Dragging on for years, boiling, simmering, boiling again. What preoccupied you, Caitlin Rother, so much that you needed to take on this sticky wicket and you needed to write this book?
Well, there were a lot of factors that went into this. I mean, one of the things I try to do when I pick a topic or a case to focus on, I have some little bells that go off in my head of cases and themes that kind of keep me interested, or that I'm curious about, that I want to know more about, because there's nothing worse than having a case where you don't care as much about the people. For some reason, they're not as sympathetic, or, and there's something about the market, you have to worry about certain things that your editor's looking for, that maybe you're interested in a case, but your editor isn't. So, but this one really rang a number of bells for me, and for a lot of people. So that's actually a bell in and of itself, is that there was a tremendous public interest in this case. There was a lot of debate about this case. And the circumstances of Rebecca's death were so bizarre and unusual that it pretty much is the definition of really the perfect case. The problem was, like I said, the sheriff's department said it wasn't a crime. So that right there kind of stopped me in my tracks. But the interesting thing was, I have sources in this town. I mean, I was a reporter here for a long time before I started writing books full time. I was a reporter for 19 years, not here the entire time, but I, grew up here and came back. So, I mean, I know a lot of people in town. My parents both worked at the university. So I had sources who brought me information, including the sheriff's investigative file, which the reporters didn't get. But there was still not a trial yet. So I just kind of sat on it, quietly collected information. And then once the lawsuit was filed in 2013, I thought, well, good. Now at least it'll hopefully get to trial, but no guarantees. It took 5 more years before it got to trial. So I went to the trial every day. I was the only journalist who was there every day.
Really?
Yeah. Well, because, because the media is short-staffed, they don't have somebody to sit there all day, every day. So, they had a camera, they had a broadcast pool camera that was there. But some days I was the pool photographer for print. Because I signed up to be in the pool.
Wow.
Because I want to take my own pictures if I can.
It's crazy.
Yeah, and so I was there every day, and basically, I just kept at it. And then I was that way. I was able to process what's new. So what was coming out that was new that no one knew before, and when the media wasn't even there, I knew that all that was going to be fodder because it wasn't in the paper, it wasn't on TV. So kind of, it's like if something tree falls in the woods and nobody writes about it, it didn't really happen. So I collected all that information, and, I got to hear all the expert testimony and gathered all that information. Then I went into high gear with the research, and, I read all the interviews that the detectives had done. I had audio and I had transcripts of those. And then I got some interesting curiosities that came out of the trial into areas that I wanted to learn more about. And I knew everybody would be interested in that. So that's a lot of what I try to do with a book. Is I'll go to a trial, and I'll actually try to go to every day of a trial if I can. That's kind of hard because you don't get paid for it. But what I did was I did some commentary on a local TV station. So I was able to get some money back for parking, stuff like that. And then I managed to get a hold of some people who maybe snippets of a deposition were played during the trial. Michael Berger, Rebecca's old boyfriend. I ended up getting some chapters from him, and one of those was about he said that he was living with her and hadn't been living together for very long, and she just disappeared and she didn't go to work, and she started calling him saying that she had been kidnapped. They've taken me. He's like, well, where are you? She says, well, I don't know. They've got something over my eyes. And she was crying, and I love you and I want to be with you. And it was just this whole thing. He told me this whole scene. And so I was able to use all of that in the book, but it wasn't in trial.
That's how it ends.
I won't, but that was one of the good parts. That's one of the new parts that people haven't heard before. So
as we dive into this, and let's get into some of the details of the case, but Patrick, I feel like I need to say to you and put a little worm in your ear that we are trying very hard not to do any spoilers tonight.
Oh yeah.
So I feel like doing that. I feel like we need to schedule another event with Caitlin after everyone has had a chance to read the book, so we can all talk about the case.
The director's cut.
The director's cut. There you go.
But I was going to say, for the few people who've been living under a rock, and you might just give a basic, survey of what actually happened in the case, and can you talk about it a little bit? And there's definitely that Arizona connection I'm sure that Camille's going to get into as well.
All right, I'll try to make it very short because it's a very complicated case. But okay, Jonah Shacknight and Rebecca Zahau were a couple, and they were spending the summer in Coronado. They normally were living in the Phoenix, Scottsdale area because Jonah ran Medicis Pharmaceutical Corporation, which was this huge cosmetic dermatological product corporations that competed with, products like Botox and stuff like that. They made all kinds of stuff. So he's a wealthy guy, really smart guy, really accomplished, a lot of different accomplishments. I was amazed at how much he's done. And anyway, so they were in Coronado at the Spreckles Mansion, which is a historic mansion. It's, when you say mansion, people think of this glamorous thing, but it's actually built in 1908. And according to some people, it was very run down and had mold, around the bathtubs, and the windows were falling apart. So Jonah wanted to really renovate it and everything. So they were working on plans to do that. Jonah had 3 kids that Rebecca was helping take care of part-time, a 6-year-old boy with his second wife, Dina, and 2 teenagers whose names I've changed because they were minors in the book, who were his children with his first wife. So there were some complicated dynamics between the ex-wives and the teenage kids and Rebecca, but Rebecca and Max were very close. So anyway, her sister came out to visit, her 13-year-old sister from Missouri, and they were all having breakfast. The 2 teenagers had gone to stay with their mom, and Rebecca was in the bathroom downstairs when she heard a crash. And she came out, and the dog was barking, and Max, the 6-year-old, was lying on the floor. There was a broken chandelier that had come down from the 2nd floor ceiling. The dog was barking. There was a razor scooter and a soccer ball. So it's unclear exactly what happened, but the boy was not breathing, and his heart was not beating. So Rebecca called out for her sister to call 911. The paramedics came. Rebecca said she gave Max CPR, at least a few breaths, and he was down for 25 to 30 minutes. So, Jonah thought that he had a chance of recovering because Rebecca did try to give him CPR. But anyway, he was very severely injured, and he ended up getting transferred to the Children's Hospital. The mom joined the hospital, but Rebecca was not allowed to come because Jonah was concerned there was going to be a scene because his ex-wife and Rebecca did not get along. So Rebecca was basically ferrying friends and relatives back and forth from the airport to the hospital and bringing Jonah clothes and stuff like that. So Adam Shacknight, Jonah's younger brother, flew out the next day And Rebecca picked him up at the airport. At the same time, she dropped her sister, who had just arrived, a couple of days before. She sent her home because this was not going to be any fun for her to have a visit during all this going on. So Jonah, Adam, and Rebecca went to dinner. Rebecca drove Jonah back to the hospital, and then Rebecca and Adam went back to the mansion. And this is where the debate starts. So I'm not going to go into what happened because we don't know for sure, but according to Adam, he went into the guest house. Rebecca went into the mansion. And when he woke up the next morning, he watched some porno in his bed on the phone, took a shower, came out and found Rebecca hanging naked, bound, and gagged from the second story exterior balcony in the rear courtyard. So he ran into the kitchen, got a knife, pulled over a table, called 911. Not sure exactly, he's changed his story a number of times, what order he did this, but the fact of the matter is, you can hear on the 911 call him dragging the table over. He said he got up there, cut her down, took her in his arms and put her on the grass, and then the paramedics and cops came. And that was all within 48 hours. So that's the case.
So we have the death of a little boy and death of his somewhat stepmother within 48 hours.
Within 48 hours, yes.
And we never really quite solved how the little boy fell,
right,
or how Rebecca got to be hanging from the balcony.
Right. The sheriff's department ruled that Max's fall was an accident. They don't know exactly how, but somehow the scooter was involved, the soccer ball, the dogs, they're not really sure, but somehow he ended up getting over the second floor railing, maybe grabbing a hold of the chandelier, swinging on it, and it broke and fell, and he fell to the floor. That's kind of what they think happened. But Dina, his mother, initially blamed Rebecca and thought Rebecca was somehow involved in this. And for quite some years was still holding on to that, and went on Dr. Phil and had some two experts that she'd hired to examine all the evidence, disagreeing with the sheriff's ruling. Jonah also hired some experts who agreed with the sheriff's ruling. So, there's still enough questions that some people still aren't really sure. Was there a hitman who killed Max first and then killed Rebecca? That's a conspiracy theory that's out there. Jonah even said to the detectives in one of the first of two interviews that he had with them, he said, do I need to get some extra security? I mean, because, if somebody's trying to hurt me by, severely harming two of the people closest to me, well, they sure did it. So he even offered the possibility that there was a hitman out there. And at the time, he also said that he didn't think Rebecca committed suicide. Today, he's convinced she did commit suicide. So it's people's change over time in this investigation as well.
Well, speaking of Rebecca, when this case first happened, it made big headlines here in Arizona, and I think it made headlines all across the country.
Yep.
Shacknight was a big man, and these two deaths were incredible. So I did, I was very interested when it came out, but I didn't really follow it over the years. And by reading your book, I learned that Rebecca Zahau was a very complicated woman. Could you tell us about that?
I was sitting in the trial and I thought to myself, Adam Shacknight's defense team is really painting a very unattractive picture of her as an impulsive, reckless woman who slept around, made up stories, this kidnapping thing. And, I just felt bad for the family because there's got to be more to her than that, because they were trying to say, oh, she was unstable, she committed suicide. There's proof on her phone with these notes, and they had a psychiatrist testify, all of these risk factors, one of which came out actually in a detective interview with her ex-husband. He's the one that told the detectives that she and her two of her older sisters, one was older than her and one was younger than her, but not the youngest sister because she hadn't been born yet, had been molested. So she clearly had a troubled life. They were political refugees. They came from this small tribe in Burma, which is now Myanmar, which is having a whole bunch of problems now as well. But, her father had been sent to prison when she was, I think before she was born. It's kind of a little iffy on the timing, but yeah, basically he had been part of the previous political administration, and so he ended up in prison because he knew a new regime took over. So anyway, they had to leave, so they ended up going to a couple other countries, and they ended up landing in Germany. But they were so poor, so part of that time, that they literally had to open the windows so birds would fly in, so they could trap them and kill them to eat them. And so she had this thing about not wanting to be poor, and she basically started, trying to find somebody who could provide for her, and her husband just couldn't. And so she dated some wealthy guy back on the East Coast. She kept leaving her husband because she claimed that he was abusing her, which she's always denied. But, she would tell every boyfriend that she had, things about her husband, and then she would tell her husband something else, and they kept getting back together. And it was this very roller coastery kind of marriage. But when it came, that she met Jonah, he knew he couldn't compete with him because Jonah had so much more money, and he knew that this was a big thing for Rebecca. So there was that. But then there was also these dynamics with Jonah's ex-wives and his teenage kids she felt very disrespectful to her and made it very difficult, a dynamic in the relationship for her and Jonah. And Jonah, I asked Jonah to talk to me about that, because she talked about it in two of the notes on her phone, how unhappy and upset she was that she didn't feel that Jonah was supporting her. He was taking his kid's side more than her, and she was very angry and upset. In the notes, these were notes that were on her phone that kind of read like you write a letter if you're mad at somebody but you don't ever send it. It was kind of like that.
Diary entry.
Yeah, exactly. So you learn things from that. But then I interviewed Jonah actually 8 times for probably 2 hours each, and I read Neil Nalepa, her ex-husband. I read his interview with detectives. I learned a lot from that. I read both sisters' interviews with detectives, and I learned a lot from that, plus all the things that they had said in public. And then I interviewed Michael Berger, the boyfriend who said that she, told him this whole story about being kidnapped. So basically, by gathering all of that information and sitting through the trial, I was able to really see a picture forming of her as a really complicated and kind of troubled person, and that I think she really didn't show this side of her to her family. Her family thought she was very happy and strong and positive and supportive and sweet. And I'm not saying she wasn't, but she had these other issues that she didn't tell them about, didn't show to them for whatever reasons. And she told different stories to different people, and many of the stories were conflicting. She had a shoplifting incident. I got the police report, and it was a very different story than what she told Jonah that had happened. So he believed her, and then later, after she was dead, learned what was in the police report. He didn't know at the time. And Dina tried to tell him, but he didn't believe her. So I didn't know that until I got really into the research, and I was able to start seeing how she was telling these different stories to different people. And, maybe it was just because she didn't want to hurt them, that she was trying to protect people's feelings. I'm not sure.
Yeah, she had a lot of issues she was dealing with.
Yeah, and she wasn't a bad person. I'm not saying, she was a liar, she was a bad person. And clearly her husband was not making her happy, so she kept leaving. And he said, well, she's cheating on me. Well, no, they were separated, but they were both very religious. They met in Bible school, and to him, because they were still married, she was cheating on him.
Well, and plus she kept coming back to him. But we talked about Jonah there. So Jonah is really the man at the center of this case, because he lost his little boy,
Right.
He lost his living girlfriend, and in many ways he lost his brother. And you did interview him 8 times, but not till the very end of your process. Tell us about that. How did you win this grieving, traumatized man's trust?
That's a really good question. I was kind of amazed, actually, that he did get in touch with me, because all I ever heard from every reporter, every TV request, Dateline, 2020 actually got him to give them you could tell it was very conditional kind of an interview. But every other documentary, there were like 7 of them. Nobody could get him to talk. And I understood from a couple of them that he actually, called to kind of complain about certain lines of questioning that he found out about, or I don't know exactly, but he's a wealthy, man who knows his way around a courtroom. He does have a law degree. So anyway, I put out feelers to his PR firm, his former PR firm, as it turns out. I didn't know that they were not still working for him. And I had the business card from the woman who was at the trial, and I reached out to her, and I guess she was on leave or something. And so anyway, it took a while for him to get the message. And so by the time he emailed me, I had finished writing the book. I hadn't turned it in yet, but I was getting to that point where I always write way too long, and then I start cutting because I tighten it that way. And so you keep all the details, but you lose some of the words. So I don't lose concepts. I just tighten all the scenes. It makes for better writing too. So he said, basically, he wanted to ask me some questions to see if he could trust me, because he had heard me say some things on TV that I guess he didn't like. And, they had seen me in the courtroom talking to the Zahau's attorney, Keith Greer, who was very friendly to me at the time. Did not end up cooperating with me on this book, however, because he's writing his own book. So the minute I got the book deal, he stopped talking to me. But my point is, they saw me talking to him. They thought I was, in his pocket, that I was on the Zahau side. So anyway, I had to tell him, no, I'm objective. I'm not taking a position in this case. I am not saying whether it's suicide or murder, because frankly, I'm not sure. But I do want to talk to you. And I'm really glad you got in touch with me. So I hope you'll trust me. So we started talking. And the way that I got him to talk to me was because I talked to him about my husband. And the reason that I got this deal in part was because my husband died by hanging. He killed himself in a motel room in Mexico in 1999. And that's part of the reason why I was so intrigued by this case, obviously, because it's a mystery. And now here's the difference. I knew my husband had threatened to commit suicide. He had been diagnosed as borderline personality by our marriage counselor, who only told me and not him, which was very awkward. And he was also a recovering alcoholic, although at the end he had relapsed and he was drinking again. So I broke off the relationship. I said, I can't do this anymore. I told you, if you drank again, we were done. And I really meant it. And then, several days later, I woke up and I could just feel it in my gut that he was dead, or he was in a hospital bed or in a ditch somewhere. I didn't know. 10 minutes later, I got the call from his AA sponsor that they found his driver's license in a motel room, and they weren't sure if it was him or not. I'm like, so for 24 hours, I was like, well, is it him or isn't it him? Anyway, so I went through this whole thing, and I know what he was like at the end. I know he had some issues. But as I got into the research with Rebecca and found out more, including during these interviews with Jonah, we discussed what happened to me, and he basically discussed what happened to him. And so we were kind of, talking to each other about our experiences. And I said to him, I'm seeing some parallels here between the two people. And she had never been diagnosed with mental illness or depression, but the notes on her phone, and clearly the relationship was in trouble. And, today looking back, people will say, well, they were on their way to breaking up. And Jonah told me that, he couldn't keep going with that level of conflict in the family. If things had not improved by the end of the summer, he said they would have, probably broken up. And he actually testified to that. So he explained more to me about all that. But basically, the reason I got him to talk to me is because I think we shared some of the same feelings, because he's convinced that Rebecca committed suicide. So anyway, his condition and talking to me was, well, are you willing to go, add things to your book? And I said, well, yes, I am. So, and I had to do that. So I had to rewrite entire chapters and sections and add new chapters and cut things. It was already too long to start with. So but I felt it was very important to have his perspective, because he was the last one who was with her, and they were together for 2 years and they lived together, and there was a lot going on.
That would be so much work to tear apart the book and make room for such a key interview.
I know.
I mean 8 of them.
Well, and we did it on Skype, just like this. So we talked. I basically had I split the screen, and I typed my notes as he was talking, even though we were both recording it. And we would do it at 10 o'clock at night because he was working and he's like launching companies and still being the industrious tycoon, but it was in the middle of the lockdown had just started. That's why we did it by Skype, because it was like March, just in the middle of March when he just started the lockdown.
Caitlin talked a little bit about her personal story there. And so I want to take this moment to highlight that one of the many things she's done is ventured into memoir. First, she did the memoir of somebody else, My Life Deleted, which it takes place in the world of football, which really shines a light on the breadth of Caitlin's talent as a writer. And that's also an Arizona story. And her own memoir is called Shoes, Lies, Shoes, and Shoelaces.
Secrets, Lies, and Shoelaces.
I'm so sorry, Caitlin. I'm so
Secrets,
sorry.
Lies, and Shoelaces. It's like Secrets, Lies, and Videotape, but I thought, no, I don't want that. Secrets, Lies, and Shoelaces. And the shoelaces play a cryptic kind of role in my story, but that's why I put them in there.
And another one of her Arizona cases is Dead Reckoning, which is about a retired Arizona couple who met a very gruesome end after taking potential buyers out for a trial run on their yacht. And Caitlin, I believe you have a very personal anecdote.
Yes,
about
I do.
An update to that story.
Yeah, so Skylar DeLeon, at the time of this case, was married to a woman named Jennifer. So Jennifer and Skylar DeLeon posed as potential buyers. They brought their 10-month-old daughter in a stroller to convince Tom and Jackie Hawks, who met in Prescott, Arizona. And but they had their boat moored in Newport Beach, California. So they would go down to Mexico and then come back. So it took place partly in Newport Beach and partly in Prescott. So anyway, bottom line is Skylar lied to them, got them to take him out on a trial, brought 2 other people with them. They overpowered Tom and Jackie, and then they ended up tying them to each other and tying them to the rope of the anchor, through the anchor overboard, and let the weight of the anchor pull them down to the bottom of the ocean. It was like the most horrible, horrible way to die. And then the detectives found during their investigation that a year earlier, Skylar had also killed somebody else, took a guy that he had met in jail when he was serving time for armed burglary. This guy was in for counterfeiting. He took him down to Mexico and basically got him to put a t-shirt over his head, like, oh, let's go, I'm gonna have a surprise for you. And then he slit his throat and left him on the side of the road to bleed out. This is the kind of guy Skylar DeLeon is. And then basically his cousin was waiting for him. They drove back over the border, went to California Pizza Kitchen. Then Skylar called in to the guard, was one of the people he brought to the boat to help murder the Hawkses. And he used the jailhouse computer to buy an anal sex machine. I have to tell you all that because this is the person that I ended up going to visit on death row. Right.
I wasn't expecting that last little zinger there.
I know, but that's what, anyway, so Skylar's motive for doing this is because she was transgender, is transgender, and wanted to get a gender reassignment surgery, which she is still trying to get today through the state of California, which now has an application process for inmates to get state subsidized gender confirmation surgery. So I went to go visit her.
See Skylar.
Sorry?
You went to see Skylar.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I went to see Skylar on death row because I'm writing a story for a magazine about this new prison, surgery application process. And I wanted to do an update on my book. So I get there and they put me in a cage with Skylar. Then they have her turn around and she puts her wrists through the hole in the door and they uncuff her and leave me in there with an uncuffed person who I know has killed 3 people in the most horrible, brutal way. And then she wants. I'm taking notes, and she goes, "Can I use your pen?" And I'm just thinking she's going to take the pen and stick it in my neck, And I just was like, "I don't think you're supposed to have that." She goes, "Oh no, it's okay." And I'm like,
did she mention fava beans and a nice?
No, but you know what? The thing about Skylar, Skylar was the happiest I'd seen her since, because I had visited her before the sentencing, and she was still presenting as a man, and all she wanted to talk about was cutting off her own penis, that she just didn't want it. So as long as you kept her talking about that, I think she was safe. That's what I did.
I think the story pretty much has it all. There's a little something for everybody.
Yeah.
So that one's Dead Reckoning. And Caitlin, I think we're getting close to the end here. So I'm going to ask you this question that I really wanted to get to. And that is, I find that true crime readers are just the most compassionate people ever. They will cry for the victim. They will hold that person in their heart with reverence. And I admire them. But sometimes true crime readers don't get support from their families, or their families don't understand why they're interested in this genre, and in fact will give them grief about it. So what would you say to true crime readers about that?
Well, I've known that the whole time that I've been a true crime writer, because I think there are a lot of authors who write in different genres who look down on true crime authors as well. And it's sort of a snobby kind of a thing, like, oh, that's just tabloid trash. That's not real writing. But so I've always, just tried to take the high road, because I don't write true crime like some other authors do that's full of glorified violence. I leave violence out as much as I possibly can. And I use my psychology degree to write about why did this happen? Who are the people who do these horrible things to someone else? And is there something in their background that causes them to do that, or influence them, or were they born that way? And I always think that that's an interesting question. But so I've had that same issue. My mother does not understand why I write this. My partner does not understand. They want to support me, and they always do, but they don't get it. So, I know what that's like. But that the great thing is that these days there's so much of it on TV that it's now accepted. So in fact, it's encouraged, and I've been on TV a lot more because of it. So it's actually helped me in the long run, because I can go on TV and talk about it. And so now it's accepted. Now it's okay.
You want to know what my answer is?
What's your answer?
My answer is the most fundamental question of humankind is life and death. Why aren't you?
Absolutely, yes.
So Patrick, I have a feeling you're going to cut me off any second here. So I'm going to say
not at all. I'm sympathetic though to Caitlin, because I know that you have a number of these to do, and you got to save your voice.
How about do you have any questions? I could take a couple questions.
Yeah, I have a couple for you.
Sure. Because I'm okay right now. I'll let you, I think another 5-10 minutes, I'll be okay.
Okay, all right. I want to talk a little bit about objectivity, and I guess it applies to Camille as well. When you approach this book, it's got to be, I'm sure it's got to be crucially important for you to maintain that objectivity throughout the whole process. And it's in this particular case where there was not a conviction, you're very upfront about not taking a position, but is your goal to kind of put it all out there for the reader to sift through and make his or her own mind up about the case. Yeah. Yes,
because to me, I was not 100% convinced either way. And honestly, it was almost like a tennis match where I'd say, okay, is it suicide? Because there's this, and this. And I'd say, but there are these questions that just don't make any sense. Why wasn't she decapitated when she went over 9-foot fall? How did she know how much rope to cut to keep her from hitting the ground? Why does she only have like one little toe imprint near the edge of the railing? How is she going to put her entire weight and throw herself over on one toe? There are a lot of things that don't make sense for the suicide, and by the same token, the murder question, Adam Shacknight's fingerprints and DNA are not found anywhere in the bedroom where the rope was anchored to a bed. There's a door where there's a message painted on the door. She saved him, can you save her? And his DNA was not found on the door or the doorknob, or, his DNA was not found anywhere in that room, only Rebecca's. And her DNA was found on the bed, on the rope, on the knife that was on the floor, which apparently she supposedly, according to the sheriff's, cut into sections and tied herself together. And
it's such a dramatic, like staged theatrical kind of scene.
And that's exactly what I determined, is that the only thing I will take a position on is that it was staged. It was either staged to be a suicide, but it's a homicide, or it's a homicide staged to be a suicide. So the question is, why would a killer stage a suicide and call so much attention to the act of it when it's like got all these bizarre components to it? And by the same token, if Rebecca committed suicide, why would she do it like that to, again, call attention to herself and gag herself and bind herself like this? And the logistics of it are confounding. Yeah. So I kind of wonder, if she did commit suicide, that she must have had a reason. And that, if we knew what that reason was, if we knew something that maybe somebody has a secret that they're not telling that would explain that, maybe we would know who she was trying to send a message to. Maybe it was Jonah. Maybe she really was angry with Jonah, and this was some secret between them that only he would understand. We talked about that, Jonah and I. It's in the book. He doesn't know what that would be, but Adam Shacknight.
Did she feel culpable for the little boys?
Well, that's what the sheriffs say. But according to her family, she never said she felt, she was upset because she loved Max and Max loved her, and she was the only adult there. But she went to go get her little sister treated because she got cut by a piece of glass, and she apparently talked to the doctor about what happened. He didn't think she seemed depressed or suicidal. There was a psychologist actually who responded with the police officer to the little boy's accident, talked to Rebecca again, said, I didn't see anything that would lead me to believe that she felt depressed or responsible. So that piece is missing. So there's a lot of questions on both sides. So that's why I'm not taking a position. And I think, frankly, if I did, I would just get attacked by the other side. Yeah. So that's not, I'd rather just be objective, because I'm not convinced. So why should I take a side? I don't even think that would be honest. So
one last question about her is, did she have a history of kind of exhibitionism or, those kinds of behaviors?
So her family said, she's a religious person. She had a great, religious upbringing.
Those are the ones you have to watch the most closely.
And she was very modest. She didn't even really sleep naked, blah, 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 and wasn't naked in front of anyone else. And then I talked to Jonah, and Jonah says, that's not true. She was very proud of her body. She was always obsessively working out. She wore clothes that revealed her really good physique, and they were both fitness nuts. And she, took great care to take care of her body and to look good. He said that she also, not that he was being critical, but just that he noticed these things, that she would take pictures of herself and put them around the house all the time. And so, I think some of those things contributed to his ultimately determining that she committed suicide, even though at the start, he was convinced that she didn't, because he thought that she would never have done that because it would reflect so badly on him and his business. And the family said the same thing. So who was Rebecca Zahau? That's one of the main questions I had when I started my research, and I wanted to show the reader everything that I could to help show both sides of her. Also, Jonah said that she really wasn't religious when she was with him. So there, like I said, she showed different sides to her family, and then the different side to Jonah.
How would your approach have changed if there was a conviction?
Well, my approach might have changed if there were more of these unanswered questions that had been answered, and that may still happen. So if, for example, there's a second lawsuit that has been filed, the Zahaus have now sued the sheriff's department. They're claiming that their investigation was flawed, that they've done a number of things that they shouldn't have. They should have looked at certain things that they didn't, and they're trying to get public records to try to reveal that they overlooked things or, came at it from a biased standpoint and a flawed standpoint. So if there is more evidence that comes out that pushes me over to one side or the other, maybe I will end up taking a position. But right now, that doesn't exist. And that's why we don't have a criminal case, because nothing has met the criminal threshold to arrest anybody.
One question that has come in is, did you find that the police were united in their take on this case?
Now, that's something that's a very hard thing to prove. So I was not able to find a hole or a crack anywhere, but
Blue wall.
yeah, because of that. But the opponent in the sheriff's race has been quoted as saying that 50% of the homicide team thought it would have been the right thing to do to reopen the case. He was actually a high-ranking, I think he was a lieutenant in the sheriff's department when he ran against the sheriff. And he got his office taken away from him, and he wasn't allowed to come out of wasn't allowed to go to meetings anymore. And so he claims that he knew of internal strife, but I was never able to prove that. If that were to come out, that would be interesting. If he wins the next election, if the sheriff steps down and a new sheriff is elected, and maybe it's this guy, he said he would reopen the criminal case. So there's more information that comes out, and some of these questions are answered. Maybe we'll know more, but right now we don't.
It's an endlessly fascinating case, isn't it? Oh my gosh.
Thank you. Yes, I think so.
Absolutely. Well, Camille, it's so great to see you. What you got cooking?
Well, I do have a top secret project that I'm working on in the true crime field. I'm not at liberty to let it out of the, let it out into the light of day yet, but it's lots of fun, and hope to see you again soon.
Yeah, that's great. Great news. Well, let's see. Caitlin, do you have any other projects in the works right now that you can talk about at all?
I am, okay, so I had to get an extension. That's one of the things I declined to mention when the Jonah thing happened. I actually did have to get a 2-week extension. So in order to have extra time to write and cut and everything. So right after I took a little break, started working on a book that I had been working on before. It was on the San Diego Frozen Zoo, which I thought was fascinating. It's like these little tiny tubes of frozen tissue cells, and they grow tissue, and they're trying to bring back sort of like a real life Jurassic Park, except the science is real, not made up as in the movies. But I got my contract canceled because of COVID. The zoo ended up having to close, and they lost a lot of money, and so they canceled my book contract. So I never got to finish that to show all the time that I worked on it. So I immediately started on a crime novel because I'm at home and I'm stuck living here with no book to work on. So I started working on a sequel to my one and only novel. All of my other books are nonfiction, but this is a mystery novel set in San Diego at the beach. It's about sex, drugs, and murder at the beach, and it's called Naked Addiction. So I'm writing a sequel to that. It's got this very handsome surfing Camus and New York Times reading detective. So he's smart and interesting and kind of sarcastic. And he meets this investigative reporter at a bar right when he gets back from surfing these huge waves in Hawaii, but he gets called away to go investigate these 2 deaths, and she's left there. She turns up at the news conference the next morning. He didn't realize she was a reporter. So it's one of those, she's a new character. So I'm basically creating, a whole, I'm pulling from all of these different cases that I've written about that are stage scenes, that are murders, that are suicides. And I put them all together into a novel and get to use all the real life stuff that I've learned over the 14 books.
Wow,
Yeah.
fast.
I'm hoping this one's going to come out this year. I've had to kind of put a hold on it to promote this book, but I'm dying to get, I'm in the editing phase right now. So
that'd be great. We'll have to have you back here, and hopefully in person by that point.
Yeah.
It's right up our alley. It sounds great.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, Caitlin and Camille, thank you very much. It's been a really enlightening discussion. I've learned a lot by listening to you. It's fun to watch 2 writers working in the same field. peek under the lid a little bit and see what's going on. Here's the new book again, Death on Ocean Boulevard. Fascinating, fascinating case.
Thank you.
And, thanks for watching, everybody on Facebook. And you guys have a wonderful night.
Thanks so much for having us.
Let's get together soon, Camille, and catch up.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Camille. This is great.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Awesome,
Thank
awesome.
you, Patrick. Thank you,
Thank you.
Poison Pen.
All right. Good night.
Good night.